They say the end of an empire is never sudden. It is not a collapse in a single breath, nor a fall marked by one final act of violence. It is quieter than that, a slow decay, like embers fading under frost. In the far reaches of the galaxy, beneath a star whose light had grown thin and cold, the remnants of a once immortal dominion stood in silence. Its spires, once blazing gold, now glimmered only faintly, as though ashamed to remember their former brightness. Here, in the halls of the eternal conclave, the last of the starborn were gathered. Their faces were unchanged by time, sculpted by eons, untouched by death. Yet something deeper wore at them, not the body, but the soul. Immortality did not grant freedom from grief. It only ensured one must carry it forever. In the heart of these great halls stood the one who had begun it all, the sovereign without age. They had long abandoned their name, for names were for those who needed to be remembered, and they had already existed beyond memory. Their eyes, once filled with celestial fire, now reflected a quieter sorrow, one born not of defeat, but of understanding. The empire they had forged to outlive the universe was dying, not from enemies, but from the weight of choices once believed righteous. It is here that we meet you, listener, drawn into the echo of collapsing eternity. And before we begin the story, I want you to feel something important, that you are not merely an observer, you matter. Your presence here, in this quiet moment between fading stars, is seen and valued. We care that you are here. So before we begin the journey, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. The sovereign stood before a grand spectral projection, a drifting star map of half the galaxy. Hundreds of systems lay dark, their lights extinguished. Others flickered weakly like dying candles. But it was not the silence of these worlds that held the room in breathless stillness. It was the spreading blackness encroaching from the void beyond. A hunger that devoured not just worlds, but memory, identity, essence. A hive without thought of mercy or guilt. A swarm grown vast enough to blot constellations from existence. The sovereign spoke quietly, though their voice once commanded worlds. The hive reaches nearer, system by system. Our fleets cannot match it. Our defenses cannot outlast it. Their tone held neither fear nor anger, only cold acceptance. Immortality has no shelter from inevitability. Around them, the council murmured, some in denial, others in resignation, a few in unspoken blame. It was then that the signal appeared, a single pulse of sound, faint and broken, echoing across the hall. Ancient, so old the receivers struggled to interpret it. The sovereign froze, not because of what it was, but because they knew exactly who it belonged to. A voice they had buried across millennia. A voice from before. Betrayal had shattered the core of their being. A voice that should not exist anymore. I am still here. The chamber fell silent. No one else recognized it. Not the council, not the guardians. Only the sovereign. Only the one who had once loved the speaker more than the empire itself, and had lost them to choices twisted by destiny and ambition. A world appeared in the transmission's coordinates. A forgotten world, one erased from every archive by the sovereign's own command. A world tied to the day everything changed, the day immortality was chosen, and the soul of their people was traded for eternity. One of the council, a figure draped in obsidian and star metal, stepped forward. It may be a trap, he warned. He was the sovereign's oldest companion now, though even he had once been only a shadow to the one in the signal. The Hive could have reconstructed fragmented code. But the Sovereign knew, code can be mimicked, but grief cannot. The memory rose unbidden, a figure standing beside them under the blazing birth of their empire, a voice full of warmth and conviction, a promise, we will be eternal together. And later, the scream of betrayal beneath collapsing stars. The Sovereign closed their eyes. We go to that world. The council erupted into chaos, pleading, arguing, shouting. They spoke of strategy, of retreats, of defenses that could be prepared. They spoke as if victory was still a thing that could be shaped by will alone. But the Sovereign had already begun to walk, for immortality had taught them something terrible. When time stretches endlessly, nothing is ever lost, only waiting. They travelled alone. No entourage, no fleet, only a single vessel carved from living crystal, its engines fueled by starfire. The journey took days, though days no longer held meaning to someone who had watched galaxies form and burn. The stars along the path were dimmer than they recalled, or perhaps they had simply never noticed their fading before. The forgotten world emerged from darkness like a scar left on the cosmos itself. Its surface was broken, its skies fractured by storms of swirling ash and pale lightning. No life should have survived here. No voice should have endured. The Sovereign descended. Silence greeted them, but not the peace of quiet worlds. This was the silence of abandonment, of something once sacred left to rot. The air was heavy with memory. The ground itself seemed to remember footsteps once taken in hope. They walked toward the ruins of what had once been a great temple, the birthplace of the decision that forged the Empire's immortality. And there, in the dust and ruin, sat a figure, not dead, not alive, something in between. Their eyes lifted, ancient, gentle, unchanged. You came. The Sovereign felt the weight of millennia shatter against them like waves against stone. You should not exist. The figure smiled, not in triumph, not in bitterness, but in sorrow. And yet I do, because you needed me to. The sky above rumbled, not with storms, but with the distant sound of wings. The Hive had found them. And there, before the first shadow fell across the ruins, the Sovereign realized this was not a reunion. It was a reckoning. The sound that filled the air was unlike any storm that nature had ever known. It was a vast and distant trembling, as though countless wings beat in unison beneath a sky that didn't yet realize it was doomed. The Sovereign did not turn to look at the horizon where the clouds darkened. Their gaze remained fixed on the figure seated among the ruins. For a long moment, neither spoke. The past hung between them like a veil, thin enough to see through, heavy enough to suffocate. You sent the signal, the Sovereign said at last. Their voice was steady, but it carried a strain that had not been present for epochs. You called me back to the place we both swore never to return. The figure's eyes glimmered with light that did not come from the broken sky. I called you because the end is close, and because I knew you would come. The Sovereign's jaw tightened. Do not presume that my presence is proof of forgiveness. A faint smile, full of something weary and impossibly gentle. I know, I did not expect forgiveness, only truth. Lightning rippled across the clouds. The distant tremor grew louder. The Sovereign stepped forward, and the earth beneath their feet responded. Old power stirring, remembering its master. Once, this world had been the cradle of their empire's ascension. It was here that the ritual of immortality had been enacted, binding their people beyond life and death. It was here that the council had stood, divided, questioning the cost. It was here that the sovereign had spoken a single command that silenced doubt, and it was here that the one before them had tried to stop it, not through rebellion, not through war, but through love. The sovereign remembered it now with painful clarity, a hand reaching out, a final plea spoken through tears. We were already eternal in the time we shared, and the sovereign, who had believed that love could be protected only through power, had refused. The wound of that choice had never healed. The figure rose slowly. Time had touched them differently. Where the sovereign and their kin became unchanging monuments, this one had remained at the edge, untouched yet not frozen, alive but not bound, a state that defied the laws of either mortality or immortality. You once asked me why I chose to stand apart, they said. You believed it was weakness, fear, but it was neither. The sovereign said nothing. It was because immortality does not preserve love, it preserves regret. Their gaze held no accusation, only understanding. You have felt that truth for longer than you will admit. The clouds parted just enough to reveal the dark silhouettes approaching. Vast forms, neither winged nor anchored by physical law, moving like a singular hunger-given shape. The hive did not conquer by intent. It consumed because that was all it knew. We don't have long, the sovereign murmured. No, the figure agreed, but long enough to decide. They walked together toward the broken archway, where once a council of billions had watched the ascension of their kind. The air shimmered faintly with remnants of ancient power, fragments still echoing with chants and oaths spoken in voices now lost to time. You believe I called you to rekindle what we once were, the figure said quietly. But I called you because what we became must end, not through defeat, but through choice. The sovereign step faltered. End immortality, the figure said. There were no theatrics, no emotional flair, just words, steady, inevitable. The sovereign felt the memory of ages pressing inward. The wars fought for their empire's expansion, the worlds reshaped in its image, the silent void of time stretching endlessly ahead. Immortality had begun as salvation, then as necessity, then as habit, then as burden. To end it would be to end us, the sovereign said. No, the figure replied softly. To end it would be to allow us to live. The ruins trembled as the hive descended lower, shadows expanding like ink bleeding across stone. The sovereign could feel the crushing presence of it, a force that did not know sorrow, did not wrestle with memory or guilt, a force that simply was. What remains of our people still believe immortality is purpose, the sovereign said. To end it would destroy the only foundation they have left, then give them a new one. The sovereign turned sharply. You speak as if we have time to rebuild meaning. We do not, the figure said, but we have time to choose our ending. A silence followed, one filled not with stillness, but with the quiet shattering of denial. For the first time in thousands of millennia, the sovereign's voice broke. I did not want to lose you. The figure stepped closer, close enough that the sovereign could feel the warmth of a presence they had thought gone forever. You didn't, they whispered. You lost yourself. The sky tore open. The hive was upon them, not descending like a storm, but revealing itself like truth long avoided, vast, writhing, monstrous, and yet strangely beautiful in its unity. An army not of individuals, but of a single unbroken will. The sovereign raised a hand, not to strike, but to summon memory. Light surged through the ruins as ancient power awakened, the ground resonating with echoes of the ascendancy ritual. The air shimmered with the brilliance of what they once were. But the figure spoke sharply. No, if you fight them with what we are now, we repeat the first mistake. The energy trembled, hesitating. The sovereign closed their hand. The light dimmed. The hive halted, not out of confusion, but because a new signal radiated through the atmosphere. A resonance, a frequency encoded not in sound, but in memory. The figure placed a hand upon the sovereign's chest. Release eternity. The sovereign looked into their eyes and saw not judgment, not triumph, not sorrow, only love, real love, the kind that does not cling to what was, but accepts what must be. So the sovereign whispered a word they had not spoken since before the empire rose, a word meaning end. The sky pulsed, the ruins glowed, the immortal bond that held their people across the stars shuddered. The hive roared, not in pain, not in fear, but in recognition. For the first time, the sovereign understood. The end had never been something to flee. It had always been something to choose. The sky trembled with the resonance of the sovereign's whispered command, though nothing yet visibly changed. The world remained scarred and silent, the hive massing in the clouds overhead, its countless forms orbiting like fragments of a single vast will. But something had shifted in the unseen threads of existence, in the binding force that had once stretched across stars and souls. Immortality, that ancient oath, had been touched, not broken yet, but no longer inviolable. The figure beside the sovereign watched the sky as though gauging the response of a sleeping giant just stirred from slumber. Their expression was calm, though not without strain. To undo what had been etched into the fabric of their people's essence was not a feat measured in power, but in conviction. It required the sovereign to relinquish something they once believed defined them, and that relinquishing had only begun. The hive descended lower. Shapes took form. Vast carapaced leviathans, tendrils sheathed in dark chitin, eyes that held no hatred because hatred required identity. There was no malice here, only function, purpose without question, a hunger that had crossed galaxies simply because there was nowhere it could stop. The sovereign drew a slow breath, inhaling dust and memory. If I release the bond fully, they said, voice low, our people will feel it, across every world where they remain, across every vessel, every fortress, every wandering soul. Their immortality will falter. The figure nodded. Yes, they will feel themselves dying. They will feel themselves living again. The sovereign closed their eyes. Far across the galaxy, uncounted descendants of the immortal empire stood in chambers of gleaming metal, upon citadels suspended in nebulous storms, or deep within void-born fleets patrolling the last fractured borders of their dominion. Some prayed, some plotted, some only waited. None of them had ever known death, not even the idea of it. It had been erased from language, from memory, from imagination. Their eternity had not been a blessing. It had been identity, purpose, reality. To remove it would be to unmake the world they understood. The sovereign's hand trembled. I do not know what remains of me without eternity. The figure's voice was soft. You do. You simply have not looked at that part of yourself in a very long time. The hive's shadow moved across the broken stone, a curtain stretching over the last sanctuary of their shared past. The first of its tendrils scraped against the ruins, emitting a sound like bone dragged across glass. Still, the hive did not strike. It watched, waited, responded. The sovereign realized then that it did not oppose them in any emotional sense. The hive sensed change. It sensed unraveling. It sensed a shift in what was. The hive existed to consume everything that reached its end. It had never truly attacked. It only came when the cycle turned. Perhaps the hive had not been the enemy at all. Perhaps it had always been the final, inevitable chapter. The figure stepped forward, placing their hand upon the cracked stone at the center of the ruin, where once, countless ages ago, a circle of living stars had been set into the ground. The circle was broken now, but the energy that slept beneath it still breathed faintly, like the last ember of a fire once bright enough to light galaxies. "This place remembers us," they whispered, "not as we became, but as we were." The sovereign knelt beside them. The stone was cold, but familiar. Memory surged, not visual, but visceral. Hands intertwined beneath a star newly born. Laughter echoing over citadels of living silver. Plans spoken not to conquer, but simply to build. To create something beautiful, something shared. It was before ambition, before fear, before the empire, before immortality. "I had forgotten," the sovereign murmured. "No," the figure corrected gently. "You buried it." In the sky, the hive shifted again, edges trembling, as though reacting to the stirring of something deeper. The sovereign felt its presence, vast and ancient, not a predator, not a beast, but a cycle. A tide older than their empire, older than the stars they once reigned upon. The sovereign laid their palm flat upon the stone. A pulse answered. Not power, memory, countless voices, hundreds of thousands carried through the echo of eternity. The voices of those who had followed them into immortality, believing it would save everything worth loving. "We are with you. We trust you. Lead us." The weight was unbearable. The sovereign bowed their head. "I do not deserve their trust." The figure's hand rested on theirs. Leadership was never about deserving. It was about choosing. You chose power once. Now choose release. The hive began to descend, slowly, as though gravity itself had shifted in reverence. Tendrils curled downward, yet did not strike. They formed a circle around the ruins, enclosing the sovereign and the figure at their center. A chrysalis of endings. The sovereign spoke, voice quiet but steady now. "If I release the bond fully, some will resist, some will fear, some will rage." "Yes," the figure said, "but they will feel again. They will breathe. They will love. They will mourn. They will live." The sovereign's fingers tightened against the stone. The bond responded. They reached inward, not into power, but into memory, into the moment before eternity, into the last heartbeat they had felt before time became an unbroken horizon. And they let it return. The bond shuddered. Across the galaxy, immortals gasped. Some fell to their knees as they felt warmth. Others cried out in terror as they felt weakness. One placed a hand on their chest and felt the echo of a heartbeat, something they had never known. The sovereign felt it too. Their heart trembled, not metaphorically, truly, a beat, then another. It was like the rhythm of the universe had re-entered their body. Their eyes widened, not in fear, but in astonishment. The figure beside them smiled. "It's terrifying, isn't it?" The sovereign laughed, quiet, breathless, and real. "Yes." The hive, sensing culmination, lowered further, tendrils encircling like the petals of some vast cosmic bloom. It was ready to consume what remained. But the sovereign saw clearly now. The hive did not feed on life. It fed on conclusion, on closure, on endings fully chosen. And so, the sovereign stood. "We are not done yet." The hive hesitated. The sovereign turned to the figure, and in their eyes was something new. Not the cold flame of eternity, nor the burden of empire, but life. real life. "I will end it," the sovereign said, "but not here, not alone. Our people deserve to understand, to choose, not to be cast from eternity into fear without knowing why." The figure nodded once. "Then we go home." The hive drew back, not retreating, but waiting, like the final page of a story not yet turned. The sovereign reached out their hand. The figure took it. Together, they walked from the ruins. The world was still broken. The sky was still dark. The hive still waited. But the sovereign no longer carried eternity alone. They carried choice, and that changed everything. The journey back toward the heart of the empire began not with triumph, but with a silence that felt impossibly delicate. The sovereign and the figure moved across the shattered landscape toward the waiting vessel, their footsteps slow, deliberate, as though each step risked fracturing something unseen. Behind them, the hive did not pursue. It hovered in the upper layers of the atmosphere like a dark crown, watching, patient. It would not strike until the ending had been chosen. It existed for that alone. The vessel recognized the sovereign's presence, opening with a subtle shift of crystalline segments. It had once been a symbol of pride, its living engines woven from stellar threads, its hull grown from matter that remembered the act of being forged. Now, as the sovereign and the figure stepped aboard, it pulsed faintly, as though sensing the change within its master. The vessel had been bound to the immortal network just as their people had, and it too felt the tremor of the bond weakening. As they lifted from the surface, the world below receded into haze and ash. The ruins disappeared beneath storms that did not belong to any season, while the hive, vast and silent, followed at a respectful distance, neither attacking nor allowing escape. It understood endings even better than the sovereign did. It knew that there could be no running from them. The sovereign stood at the vessel's central viewing chamber, watching starlight slide across the hull. The figure remained quiet, seated nearby, allowing the sovereign space to feel the shift taking place inside. A heartbeat continued its rhythm. Slow, unfamiliar, undeniably alive. It felt fragile, as though it could fail at any moment, and yet it also carried a strength that immortality had never possessed. It felt true. "You are afraid," the figure said softly. The sovereign did not deny it. "Yes." "Of what?" "That they will hate me for this. That they will not understand why I am choosing to end the only eternity they have ever known." The figure regarded them gently. "They will fear it. Some may hate you. Others will cling to what they believe protects them. But do not mistake their fear for rejection. They will feel again. And when they feel, they will remember what it means to choose." The sovereign's gaze drifted to the console, where the holographic map of the empire flickered. Worlds that had once burned with the light of unending dominion now flickered like dying embers. A great civilization that had once redefined existence now clung to purpose through memory alone. The sovereign had led them into eternity, believing it would preserve beauty, unity, love. But immortality had stripped those things bare. Without mortality, there was no urgency. Without an end, there was no meaning. The vessel approached the core system, where the capital world hung in orbit, around a star that had been artificially sustained for millennia. The star's light was still bright, but something in its core had begun to unravel. The bond between it and the immortals that sustained its unnatural burning was weakening. It dimmed by a fraction, too small for untrained eyes, but unmistakable to those who had shaped it. The sovereign felt guilt rise like a slow tide. The figure stepped closer. "This is not your fault alone. We chose to follow you. Even I would not undo the past. I would only change where it leads. The capital world came into view. Great silver continents folded around oceans of glass, citadels rising into the upper atmosphere, and the eternal conclave at its center, crowned by a spire that touched the ionosphere. A monument to the belief that nothing born of their empire could ever fall. The sovereign knew what must be done, but knowledge and courage were different things. The vessel descended, passing through layers of radiant shielding. The moment it crossed the threshold of the capital's airspace, alarms spread across the defense network. They were not hostile alarms, rather, alarms born from confusion. The sovereign had left alone. They had returned with someone who should have been a myth. And more than that, every immortal on the world had felt the shift in the bond. Uncertainty rippled like seismic energy. When the sovereign stepped from the vessel, the conclave awaited. Hundreds of immortals stood in ordered tiers, robes of starlight and metallic thread, casting reflections across the marble floor of the landing atrium. Their expressions were composed, but beneath their stillness ran fear. Real fear. The kind that had no name in their language, because it hadn't been felt since before they became eternal. The sovereign walked forward. The figure remained one step behind, neither concealed nor announced. Their presence was quiet, but undeniable. And the murmurs that spread through the hall were not of recognition. They were of memory resurfacing for the first time in ages. The obsidian-robed advisor, the one who had accompanied the sovereign longer than any still living, stepped forward. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the dread within. "What have you done?" The sovereign did not answer immediately. They allowed silence to settle, not as a weapon, but as acknowledgement. "I have released the first boundary of the bond," the sovereign said, voice carrying across the hall. "Immortality is no longer absolute." A ripple of disbelief, shock, anger, grief. The advisor's voice sharpened. "The Hive approaches. You would strip us of the very thing that allows us to resist it." "No," the sovereign replied. "I am stripping us of the thing that prevents us from living." A young member of the conclave, young only in spirit, for youth had not existed among them for ages, stepped forward, voice trembling. "We do not know how to live without eternity." The sovereign's heart, still new in its pulse, ached. "I know. That is why I have not destroyed it, only loosened it. The choice will be ours to make, together." The advisor turned his gaze toward the figure standing beside the sovereign. Recognition struck him like a physical blow, though he had not expected the memory to still exist. "You," he whispered, "you are the one who—" The figure did not let him finish. "I was the one who told the sovereign there was another way. I failed then. I will not fail now." A murmur grew, voices rising, fear clashing against hope. The sovereign raised a hand, and the hall stilled. The Hive is not here to conquer. It is here to witness the end of what we once were. If we greet it unchanged, we will be devoured. But if we greet it whole, if we release ourselves from eternity, then it will not consume us. It will let us pass. Those words were met with disbelief, confusion, and something new, something fragile and bright, possibility. The advisor's voice trembled, not with fear now, but sorrow. "If we choose mortality, we will know loss again." The sovereign met his eyes. Yes, and love, and meaning. The hall fell into a long, aching silence. Then the figure stepped closer, voice warm, steady, and unbearably gentle. "Endings are not destruction. They are completion. The Hive is not death. It is the final turn of the cycle. We were never meant to remain unchanging. We were meant to live, to feel, to grow. The sovereign felt the heartbeat again, real and alive. Let us choose our ending, they said. Across the hall, a single immortal placed their hand over their chest, then another, and another. Some hands trembled, some were steady, but all were human again. The sovereign closed their eyes and released the bond, not broken, fulfilled. Across the galaxy, the immortal empire exhaled as one. The Hive, waiting beyond the capital sky, descended in silence, not as a destroyer, but as a witness. The Hive did not fall upon the capital with the violence that history had once feared. It descended instead with the stillness of a tide at dusk, its vast and impossible forms drifting through the upper layers of the atmosphere like dark constellations shifting closer to the world below. The sky dimmed beneath their presence, but there was no thunderous assault, no tearing of stone or sky. The Hive waited, suspended in the patience of natural law. The immortals gathered in the conclave felt the shift intimately. Their bodies, once inviolate, now pulsed with the first faint signs of mortality awakening. A warmth had returned to their limbs. A soft beat echoed in their chests. They felt sensation again, the slight weight of breath, the faint ache in joints unused to bearing time's passage. Some embraced it with trembling curiosity. Others recoiled, as though the sensation itself was a wound. The sovereign stood before them, heart steady but heavy. The figure remained at their side, not as advisor or challenger, but as equal. Their presence alone softened the edge of what approached, grounding the moment in something human, something real. The advisor in obsidian approached once more, his gaze steady in a way it had not been since they first arrived. "The Hive is not attacking," he said quietly, "but it will not wait forever. We must decide." The sovereign nodded. "Yes, and that decision must not be mine alone." To say such words felt strange, even to their own ears. The sovereign had led from the front for thousands of years. Decisions had been edicts, a single voice shaping epochs. But now that eternity had begun to release its hold, the sovereign felt something new. The weight of shared responsibility, where once they had believed only solitary command could prevent disaster. The conclave moved as one toward the Hall of Resonance, the chamber where the immortal bond had first been forged. The corridor stretched beneath towering arches carved from the memory of stars, walls shimmering faintly with symbols that had not been spoken in ages. At its center was a great circular floor of polished obsidian and silver, designed not merely as a space of council, but as a place where decisions reshaped worlds. The immortals formed a ring, surrounding the sovereign and the figure. No one spoke. No one needed to. The question hovered between every heartbeat. Would they choose to remain unchanging and face the Hive as they always had, with defiance, with unyielding immortality, with all meaning exhausted long ago? Or would they release eternity entirely, allowing themselves to live, to feel, to change, and trust that the Hive would not devour what could still grow? The sovereign stepped into the center of the circle. "When I first led us into eternity, I believed I was saving us," they began, voice quiet but clear enough to reach every ear. "I believed that by removing death, I was preserving love, beauty, and all that we cherished. I believed that if we were eternal, nothing we created would fade." The gaze swept across the faces around them, faces they had known for so long that time itself had lost meaning. But I did not understand then that eternity without change is not life. It is memory without meaning, existence without purpose. stillness woven over the soul until we can no longer remember what joy feels like. The advisor lowered his gaze, not in shame, but in recognition. Now, the sovereign continued, the hive has come to claim what has reached the end of its cycle. If we cling to eternity, it will take us, not out of cruelty, but because that is the law of things that do not grow. The figure stepped forward, their voice a soft thread woven into the sovereign's own. But if we release eternity, if we choose to live again, the hive will not take us, for that which can change need not end. The hall stirred, breath, emotion, uncertainty. Then a single voice spoke, one of the younger immortals who had earlier stepped forward. Their tone was fragile like crystal newly formed. If we choose life, will we remember all that has happened, or will our memories fade with time? The sovereign's answer came without hesitation. We will remember, but memory will no longer define us. It will shape us. That is what it means to be alive. A murmur rose, some fearful, some hopeful, some grieving the thought of letting go of what had once seemed divine. The advisor took a long breath, then stepped into the circle as well. His voice carried the steadiness of someone who had wrestled with belief and emerged changed. All things that live must one day end, he said, but only things that live can love. I would rather die having loved once more than endure eternity without ever feeling again. One by one, the immortals placed their hands over their hearts, acknowledging the beat they had not felt in ages. The sovereign turned toward the central altar, the resonant core where immortality had been bound. It had once gleamed like the heart of a star. Now it flickered faintly, its power strained by the unraveling already begun. They placed their hands upon its surface. The bond pulsed, and the chamber trembled. The figure rested their hand atop the sovereign's. Their presence did not strengthen the act. It simply made it bearable. The sovereign drew breath and spoke the true word of release. The chamber burst with light, not blinding but warm, golden, like dawn after a night that had lasted too long. The immortals felt something within them loosen. Some wept, some gasped, some simply closed their eyes. Their eternity fell away like a veil, not shattered, not destroyed, but transformed. The bond that once made them unchanging now became something new, a connection woven not of permanence, but of shared memory and shared future. Not chains, threads that could be broken, threads that could be chosen, threads that could be rewoven. The light faded slowly. The sovereign stood breathing, truly breathing. Their heart beat with a steady rhythm that felt like the universe itself moving inside their chest. The immortals around them felt the same, fragile and infinite all at once. Outside, the hive descended, but this time, it did not surround the world in hunger. It came to a stop above the capital like a shroud at rest. Its endless chorus of thought, for the first time, aligned into a single whisper, unspoken, but felt. You have chosen. The sovereign lifted their head. We face it now, they said, not as eternals, but as living beings. The figure's hand remained in theirs. The advisor stepped to their side. The conclave gathered in a single breath. The hive opened. The world held still, and the next moment would decide whether the galaxy would know renewal or final silence. The hive drifted lower, its colossal form shifting like a continent made of shadow and hunger. But now, its descent carried no sense of imminent destruction. There was curiosity in the way it moved, an ancient and instinctive recognition of change. The air trembled with resonance, as though the world itself held its breath. The sovereign stood at the forefront of the conclave, the figure still at their side. Every immortal present felt the pulse of their own heart, steady and unfamiliar, grounding them in a reality they had not known for longer than memory could stretch. The new bond, not of eternity, but of shared life, pulsed softly between them. They were connected, yes, but not bound, and that difference was everything. The advisor's voice was low when he spoke. "What happens now?" The sovereign did not answer immediately. They stepped forward to the balcony that overlooked the capital's central sky. From here, the Hive's vastness filled the horizon. Dark shapes layered upon themselves like wings of a celestial moth, each movement flowing into the next. It was terrifying, but no longer in the same way. The fear that once rose at its sight had been rooted in the fear of losing eternity. That fear had been released. What remained was awe. "The Hive does not destroy life," the sovereign said quietly. "It consumes only what has reached its end. We were once stagnant, unchanging. We had already ended, though we continue to exist. Now," they placed their hand over their heart, "we live again." A tremor of emotion rippled through those who listened. Some felt relief, others grief. Some struggled to understand, but no one withdrew. The Hive moved again, a massive node of its collective form lowering to the level of the capital spire. It was not a creature nor a machine. It did not have eyes or mouths or faces. Instead, it formed shapes only to express meaning, the way a tide shapes the shore as it arrives and departs. The sovereign felt its presence like a whisper through deep water, ancient, inevitable, patient. The figure beside them stepped forward, expression steady. "It is asking," they murmured, "not with words, but with recognition." The sovereign nodded. "It is waiting to see whether we choose to continue living." The immortals around them understood. The Hive was not here to decide their fate. It was here to reflect it. The sovereign turned to their people. "Each of you must choose, not for the empire, not for me, but for yourselves." Their words fell like quiet thunder. "We can remain as we are now, living, but near the edge of the Hive's horizon. Or we can step forward. We can leave behind the relics of immortality entirely. We can embrace life fully, knowing that its end gives its moments meaning." A murmur spread, not in disagreement, but in contemplation. A voice rose from the crowd, one of the youngest again. "If we choose to live, what do we do? We have forgotten how." The sovereign's gaze softened. "We learn, we remember. We build not to preserve what is, but to honor what could be." A soft breeze swept through the hall of resonance. It carried nothing, no scent, no warmth, and yet it felt like spring. The advisor stepped forward. "And if some choose to remain as they are?" The sovereign answered with quiet honesty. "Then they will continue, not immortal, but long-lived, free, not bound to eternity, but not forced into mortality either. No one will be cast out of the future we choose." The figure met the sovereign's eyes, and something unspoken moved between them. A memory of the choice that had once shattered them, now being remade differently. A new voice rose in the hall, steady, old, worn. One who had stood at the sovereign's side during the forging of the empire, who had believed in eternity without hesitation. "We feared death because we misunderstood it," she said. "We believed it erased meaning. But eternity erased more. It erased our capacity to feel meaning. I would like to feel again." She placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head. One by one, others followed, some with certainty, some with trembling hands, some with tears they did not yet understand how to shed. Not all stepped forward. Some stepped back, unsure, unready, unwilling. The sovereign accepted both. "There is no right answer," they said, "only chosen ones." The hive shifted again, this time lowering a fragment of its vast form toward the plaza below the spire. It took shape like an enormous arch made of endless layered tendrils, all flowing and reforming, like the surface of deep water stirred by slow tides. But there was no threat in the movement. It was an invitation. The figure spoke softly. "It will not take us unless we approach willingly. The hive does not force endings. It completes them." The sovereign exhaled. Their heartbeat was slow, steady. The weight of ages felt lighter, even if the path ahead was unclear. "We will go," they said, "but not to die, to understand." No one argued. The sovereign began to walk. The figure walked beside them. The advisor followed, and then the conclave. They descended the long steps toward the plaza, where the hive's arch waited. The atmosphere vibrated with resonance, not sound, but recognition. Every living thing seemed to be held in suspension, as though the world itself understood the gravity of what was about to occur. As they approached the arch, the sovereign felt their heart quicken, not with fear, but with wonder. The hive did not radiate death, it radiated inevitability, like the final note of a song that resolves the melody. The sovereign stopped at the threshold. Their hand tightened around the figure's. The figure squeezed back. Although no words were spoken, the meaning passed between them clearly. We began this together. We end it together. The sovereign stepped forward. The hive enveloped them in silence, not dark, not cold, not ending, but transformation. The immortals watching felt not loss, but release, as though a weight tied to the galaxy itself was finally unbound. The sovereign did not disappear. They became something else, not eternal, not devoured, but alive, wholly and completely. The hive withdrew, satisfied, and for the first time in an age, sunrise broke across the capital, not perfect, not permanent, not eternal, just real. The moment of transformation did not announce itself with thunder or brilliance. It arrived quietly, like the first breath after waking. The sovereign stepped through the arch and felt the hive's presence not as an external force, but as something vast and ancient, acknowledging their existence. There was no dissolution of the self, no tearing apart, no erasure. Instead, there was a gentle unfolding, like a hand unclenching after centuries of holding too tightly. For a heartbeat, all sound vanished. The world outside the hive's veil fell away. There was only a great, endless quiet, deep and oceanic. And then breath returned. The sovereign found themselves standing upon a plane of shifting light, not solid, not void, but something between. Shapes moved in the distance, vast silhouettes drifting like memories across the horizon of thought. The hive did not exist in physical form here. It existed as intention, a chorus of infinite voices speaking without words, yet none of it overwhelmed. The sovereign's new heartbeat was an anchor, slow, steady, undeniably alive. The figure stood beside them, unchanged, and yet illuminated by the same soft glow. Their presence was a grounding constant. They reached out, taking the sovereign's hand, and reality stabilized around the two of them. The hive did not intrude. It did not push or pull or claim. It waited. The sovereign lifted their gaze. "Why have you not taken us?" The answer did not come in words. It came as understanding, direct, clear, and absolute. "We do not consume what still moves forward." The sovereign exhaled slowly. They understood then that the hive was not a devourer of life. It was a devourer of stagnation. It came not to end growth, but to complete cycles that had reached their conclusion. Immortality had frozen their people. It was not life that the Hive had once sought to consume. It was the absence of life. The figure's voice came softly beside the sovereign. We feared the Hive because we believed ourselves special, exempt from change. But we were simply delaying what must come to all things. The sovereign nodded. We forgot the shape of the universe. Everything moves. Everything transforms. They looked back toward the plane of shifting light, letting the truth settle fully. The Hive had not followed them to destroy. It had followed to witness the choice, to ensure it was made freely, not forced. The sovereign closed their eyes and saw the capital world as it now was. The immortals below, breathing, heart beating, newly vulnerable. Some walked outside for the first time in an age, feeling wind not as sensation but as experience. Some wept, some screamed, some laughed, but all felt. The Hive observed that world now, not hunting, not closing in, but standing at the threshold, waiting for the next moment of decision. The sovereign turned to the figure. If we remain here too long, they will look to us and hesitate to move without our guidance. The figure smiled faintly, warm, steady, unburdened. Then we return, not as rulers, not as gods, but as part of them. The sovereign nodded. The plane of light dissolved around them like morning mist. The arch returned. The world returned. Sound and air and the beating of a living heart all rushed back, familiar and wholly new. The immortals below watched with breath held. The advisor stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion he did not yet know how to control. What did you see? The sovereign answered simply. The Hive does not demand our ending. It only completes endings we have already chosen. We are no longer at our end. Relief rippled through the conclave. But it was not pure relief. It came mixed with uncertainty, vulnerability, and questions. They were immortal no longer, but mortality had not yet shaped itself into meaning. Their future had become open, limitless in a way eternity had never been. The advisor lifted his gaze. What do we do now? The sovereign did not step onto the podium as they once would have. They did not lift their voice above the assembly. Instead, they spoke as one voice among many. We begin again, not as conquerors of the stars, not as guardians of eternity, but as a people who live and learn and change. The figure added, we explore, not the galaxy, but ourselves, what it means to choose, to shape and reshape, to love without fear of eternity, making love meaningless. The crowd did not erupt into cheers. There was no celebration, only stillness. The stillness of a forest after a long winter, waiting for spring to decide how it will awaken. The sovereign stepped down among their people, not elevated, not worshipped, equal. They felt the brush of a hand, tentative, trembling. It belonged to the young immortal who had first spoken in the hall. Her eyes were glass bright, overwhelmed. It hurts, she whispered, but it hurts in a way that feels alive. The sovereign rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. That is what it means to return to yourself. In the distance, the hive began to withdraw, not fleeing, not defeated, simply continuing its path through the cosmos. The threat was gone, but not because it had been repelled, because it was no longer needed. The capital breathed for the first time in a very long time. Yet even as peace settled, a quiet realization formed. Though immortality had been released, their lives would last ages still. Time stretched forward, not endless, but vast. Their journey was far from over. They would face grief, love, loss, rebirth, conflict, all the truths of living beings. And eventually, the Hive would return, not as doom, but as completion. The sovereign walked to the high balcony overlooking the capital. The figure leaned beside them, shoulder to shoulder. "Are you afraid?" the figure asked softly. The sovereign looked out over the world that was no longer eternal, but alive. "Yes," they said, and their voice was steady. "But I would rather be afraid and living than fearless and already gone." The sun continued to rise. Its light was no longer eternal, but it was beautiful. The sovereign took the figure's hand again, not to hold on, but simply to share the moment. And in that quiet space, between breath and heartbeat, the first day of a new age began. The first dawn of the new age unfolded slowly, as though the light itself was cautious in relearning how to touch the world. The sun, no longer held in perfect stasis by immortal will, rose with a softness that few among the people had ever seen. It did not blaze with unnatural brilliance. It glowed, it warmed, it lived. The sovereign watched it from the balcony for a long while, their hands still joined with the figures. They were quiet, not from hesitation, but from reverence. Everything felt fragile now, every breath, every sound, every movement. And fragility, once feared, now felt sacred. Below them, the capital was beginning to stir. The immortals, now no longer eternal, moved differently. Their steps were slower, more deliberate. Their eyes searched one another's faces, as if rediscovering expressions that had always been there yet never understood. Laughter sounded strange in the air, thin, unsteady, but genuine. Tears appeared openly for the first time in an age, not as symbols of tragedy, but of release. The advisor approached from behind, quiet until he stood beside the sovereign and the figure. His posture was straight, but not rigid as it had been. His voice, when he spoke, carried new weight, not of command, but of shared experience. "The people are uncertain," he said. "They seek guidance." The sovereign nodded, still watching the capital below. "They will need time." "Yes, but time is no longer endless," the advisor replied gently. The sovereign turned to him. There was no distance between them now, no barrier of role or rank. "Then we do not lead as we once did. We guide when needed. We listen. We learn alongside them." The advisor looked down at his hands, hands that had once been instruments of unquestioned authority. Now they trembled faintly, though he did not hide it. For the first time, he looked not like a monument of eternity, but like a man. "What of the worlds beyond?" he asked. "The outposts, the fleets, the sanctuaries beyond this system. They will feel the bonds release as we did." "They will awaken," the sovereign said, "some with wonder, some with fear." Their gaze lifted to the horizon, where the sky still shimmered faintly with the after-presence of the Hive. "We must speak to them, but not to command, to share." The figure stepped forward then, leaning lightly against the balcony's crystalline rail. "We cannot tell them what to choose, but we can show them that the choice is theirs to make." The advisor bowed his head in agreement, yet even as peace seemed to settle, a soft tension rippled beneath the surface. Not resistance, not doubt, something deeper, an awareness of the unknown. For though immortality was gone, the memory of eternity remained, and memory carries weight. A child, though child was not quite the right word for someone who had lived millennia, approached the sovereign from the courtyard below. Her steps were hesitant but purposeful. She lifted her gaze upward, eyes wide and shimmering. "May I speak?" she called. The sovereign inclined their head. "You may." She walked closer, her voice shaking not from fear, but from feeling something she could not yet name. When the bond changed, I felt something break, but I also felt something open. I don't know who I am without eternity. I don't know what I am meant to do now. The sovereign descended the steps slowly, leaving the balcony behind. They came to stand beside her. Their presence was no longer overwhelming. They no longer towered as an idea, but stood simply as a living being trying to understand. "You are not meant to know yet," the sovereign said. "Life is not built all at once. It is shaped moment by moment. You will discover yourself, not by what you were, but by what you choose." The young one swallowed. "But what if I choose wrong?" The sovereign's answer was gentle. "Then you will choose again." Her breath caught, not in fear, but in relief. She bowed her head and left to rejoin the others, where newfound laughter and questioning murmurs intertwined like threads weaving the beginnings of culture reborn. The figure came to stand beside the sovereign again. Their expression was soft, thoughtful. "Even now you lead." The sovereign shook their head. "No, I only remind them that they can shape themselves." But the figure's voice remained steady. "That too is leadership." The advisor approached once more, though this time not alone. A group of immortals, newly mortal, accompanied him. Their faces ranged from resolute to uncertain, but all of them carried the same question in their eyes. "What will become of us?" one asked. "We have lived only in empire. We do not know how to live otherwise." The sovereign gestured toward the world around them, toward markets reopening, toward gardens being tended, toward families rediscovering each other in ways deeper than ritual. "We build, we plant, we speak, we try, we make mistakes, we learn." Their voice softened. "We remember, but we do not cling." One among the group lowered their gaze. "Then what of the empire?" The sovereign looked out across the capital once more, where the architecture of eternity gleamed beneath a sun that now would one day fade. "The empire as it was is finished. What comes next will not be an empire. It will be a home." The words settled into the air. They did not resonate with triumph, nor with mourning. They simply were truth spoken without force. The advisor took a slow breath. "Then our first task is rebuilding." "No," the sovereign replied. "Our first task is understanding. Only once we understand who we are now can we decide what we build." The group dispersed, carrying those words with them. Some to contemplate, some to question, some to grieve, some to hope. The sovereign and the figure walked together toward the great courtyard, where the first seeds of rebirth were quietly taking root. The wind carried the faint scent of living earth, a scent they realized they had not noticed in millennia, for immortality had dulled the senses. Now the world was vivid again. As they walked, the sovereign's gaze lifted once more to the sky, where the last traces of the Hive's presence drifted beyond the atmosphere. It had not vanished. It lingered at a respectful distance, watching not as conqueror or predator, but as participant in the greater cycle. "We will see them again," the figure murmured. "Yes," the sovereign replied, "when our time is ready, not before." Their steps slowed. The figure turned gently to face them. "And when that time comes, will you fear the end?" The sovereign considered this, not as an emperor, not as a legend, but as a being with a heartbeat. "No," they said softly, "not anymore, because when the end comes, it will mean the life we lived meant something." The figure smiled, a quiet, tender smile that belonged not to immortals, but to people. The courtyard opened before them, filled with life in its first trembling stages. They walked forward together, not as sovereign and sacrifice, not as leader and follower, not as myth and memory, but as two beings living their first true day. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty, the kind of quiet that comes after the last echo of a great bell, when the air still holds the memory of sound. Life in the capital began to take shape as something unfamiliar and tentative. Gardens once purely ornamental were now tended with purpose. Food was grown, not synthesized. Music was played, not merely remembered. Conversation returned, hesitant at first, then slowly warmer, deeper, real. The sovereign walked among their people without escort or exalted presence. Some bowed still, reflex born from ages of structured reverence. But most simply looked, searching, studying, recognizing. The sovereign had become something they had never been before, reachable. They held the same fragility, the same uncertainty, the same quietly thrilling fear of the future as everyone else. The figure walked with them often, though not always. They too were rediscovering who they were in this world that finally breathed again. Sometimes they sat in the gardens, watching the young ones laugh at the unpredictability of wind and water. Sometimes they wandered the libraries, touching the spines of records that once contained centuries of lifeless perfection. They moved gently now, as though the act of living required reverence. But not all embraced the new age with open hearts. Whispers began to form in the lower citadel. Quiet at first, spoken in the shadows of colonnades and beneath the great skyways. Whispers of those who did not view mortality as liberation, but as betrayal. They felt the loss of eternity as a wound carved deep into the soul. For them, eternity had not been stagnation. It had been identity, purpose, truth. The sovereign was aware. They could feel the disquiet the way one feels a chill in a warm room, subtle, unmistakable. One evening, as dusk turned the sky shades of violet and ember, the advisor approached with a troubled expression. "There are gatherings," he said quietly, "not violent, not yet, but spoken with fervor. They believe the release of the bond has doomed us. They believe we have surrendered to the Hive." The sovereign stood still for a long moment. The courtyard around them glowed with the soft golden lights of living lanterns. Small, floating, bioluminescent forms that had once been cultivated to signify celebration. Now they floated simply because they could. The sovereign watched them drift. "Fear often wears the mask of conviction," they said. "We must speak to them, not to silence their fear, but to show that we share it." The advisor hesitated. Some say they wish to restore eternity. The sovereign turned to face him fully. To restore eternity now would be to undo life itself. To return to a state of unchanging existence is to end the very thing we reclaimed. "Yes," the advisor said softly, "but they cannot yet see that." The sovereign nodded. "Then we will show them, not with argument, with witness." The figure joined them then, having heard without needing to be summoned. "We should go to them," they said, "not as rulers, as those who have made the choice and lived through its first days." And so they did. The gathering took place in one of the great amphitheatres of the capital. Once, the space had been used for declarations of empire, philosophical debates, and ceremonial affirmations of eternity. Now it was filled with those who felt stripped, exposed, uncertain. Some stared at the sovereign with longing, some with accusation, some with sorrow so raw it seemed ready to break open into grief. The Sovereign stepped into the center. No guards, no elevated platform, just presence. The murmurs quieted, but tension held the silence taut. One among the gathered, tall, stern, once a commander of the outer fleets, stepped forward. "You took eternity from us," she said. Her voice did not tremble. It did not accuse. It stated, "You took what we were." The Sovereign did not look away. "Yes, I did." A ripple moved through the crowd. Shocked that the admission came so simply, the Sovereign continued, "I took what I believed was killing us, what had turned us into reflections of ourselves, what had hardened us against wonder, against change, against love." The commander's eyes darkened. "We were strong." "We were stagnant," the Sovereign replied. "Strength that does not change becomes stone." "We were united. We were unalive." The commander's voice rose, finally carrying the force of the wound beneath. "We were eternal." The Sovereign's voice did not rise in answer. It softened. "Yes, and eternity was the cage we built around our own hearts." Silence spread again, but it was a silence that listened. The figure stepped forward then, their presence calm and steady. They looked at the commander, not with challenge, but with recognition. "You grieve," they said gently, "not eternity itself, but the version of yourself that believed in it. You grieve the loss of certainty, the loss of invulnerability, the loss of not needing to feel." The commander's breath hitched, a microscopic break in the armor. The figure's voice remained quiet. "Grief is not wrong. It is the first sign of life returning." Some in the crowd lowered their gazes. Others blinked rapidly. A few turned away, unable to face the rawness of what they felt. The Sovereign stepped closer to the commander, not imposing, not correcting. "When we chose eternity," they said, "we believed we were protecting what mattered, but we did not understand that meaning requires change. Eternity was not the preservation of the self, it was the erasure of becoming." The commander closed her eyes. A tear, small and reluctant, slipped free. The Sovereign did not reach to wipe it away. They simply stood beside her. Slowly, the commander drew a breath. "I do not know how to live like this," she whispered. The Sovereign's answer was gentle, unwavering. "Neither do I. Not yet. But we will learn. Together." The amphitheater did not erupt in applause. It did not resolve into immediate unity. It did not need to. What it did was exhale. A collective, trembling breath that marked the first acceptance of uncertainty. Not as loss, but as possibility. The Sovereign walked back toward the courtyard with the figure at their side. The advisor followed, quiet and thoughtful. The night sky stretched overhead, open, endless, full of stars that now shone with futures instead of memories. The figure slipped their hand into the Sovereign's. "You spoke truth," they said. The Sovereign nodded. "Truth is easier now. When the heart is allowed to beat, truth has somewhere to live." The stars pulsed softly, like distant hearts answering, and though the future was uncharted, unguaranteed, and fragile, it was alive. Night settled softly across the capital, but it no longer possessed the sterile stillness it once had. Darkness had texture now. Crickets whispering among the gardens, distant laughter echoing across open courtyards, lights flickering like living embers rather than perfect eternal glow. The world was beginning to breathe in rhythms it had forgotten, and with every breath, the Sovereign felt their heart answering, steady, imperfect, and profoundly real. Yet beneath this quiet rebirth, something subtle shifted in the undercurrent of the city. Not defiance, not rebellion, but uncertainty's shadow growing sharper at the edges. The sovereign felt it first while crossing a bridge suspended over a garden of flowering constellations, blossoms genetically shaped to mirror galaxies once conquered. They paused, sensing a faint dissonance beneath the harmony of the world, a thread pulled taut, a silence too intentional. The figure noticed it as well, stepping close enough for their shoulder to touch. "You feel it?" "Yes," the sovereign replied. "There is something gathering. Not rejection, something else." The advisor approached, moving with careful purpose. He bowed his head. Not ceremonially, but respectfully. "There is a group forming near the Citadel's lower tier. They call themselves the Remembered. They do not oppose the new life we have chosen, but they are searching for something we have not spoken of." The figure's voice was calm. "Purpose." The advisor nodded. "We gave them life again, but not direction." The sovereign understood. Immortality had robbed them of meaning, yes, but it had also absolved them of choosing purpose. Eternity had been the purpose. Without it, the world was wide and unshaped, beautiful, but terrifying in its openness. The sovereign walked with the advisor and the figure toward the lower tier. There, amidst amphoras of starlit water and stone benches once used for philosophical debate, gathered a small circle of immortals, though the word no longer quite fit. Their posture was contemplative rather than confrontational. Their faces were thoughtful, weighted by questions deeper than grief. The one who led them was neither old nor young, a scholar once charged with curating the history of their people. He stepped forward as the sovereign approached. "You came," he said simply. "I did," the sovereign answered. "I would hear what troubles you." The scholar gestured for them to sit, and the sovereign did. At the same level, no hierarchy marked between them. The figure sat beside them. The advisor remained close but quiet, a sentinel not of authority but of presence. The scholar began. "We do not reject the return of life. We do not long for the perfection of eternity. We understand why the bond was released." There was no bitterness in his voice, only depth. "But now we must ask, what does it mean to be a people when the foundation that once defined us is gone?" The sovereign considered their response carefully. "We are no longer bound by what we were. We may define ourselves anew." The scholar inclined his head. "Yes, but definition requires intention, and intention requires recognition of what came before." He looked to the sky, where faint traces of the hive's vast form still glimmered like distant auroras. "We have lived so long that our history stretches beyond comprehension. To begin again, we must decide what of our past remains with us, and what we must release." One of the gathered spoke softly. "We died countless times in the name of eternity, though our bodies did not fall. Our grief was locked inside us without release. Now we face it all at once." Another added, voice cracking, "How do we mourn ages? How do we mourn what we cannot measure?" The sovereign listened, truly listened, and felt a truth rise from within. "By mourning not the age itself," they said slowly, "but the moments, the lives we lived inside that age, the loves we held, the friendships we lost, the choices we made. We mourn not the empire, but the selves we once were." The scholar studied them with deep, searching eyes. "Then we must learn to remember differently." The sovereign understood. Immortality had preserved history as monument, rigid, absolute, unmoving. If they were to live now, history must become memory, held gently, allowed to breathe, allowed to be reinterpreted, not as chains, but as foundation. "We will build a hall of memory," the sovereign said. not to enshrine the past, but to open it, a place where we may speak of what we were and decide together what we carry forward. Whispers of relief moved through the gathered. The figure touched the sovereign's hand lightly, an affirmation without words. But then the scholar raised a final question, the one beneath all others. "And what of you?" he asked quietly. "What are you now, if not sovereign?" The question hung, suspended. The crowd waited. Even the advisor leaned in slightly. The sovereign had prepared themselves to answer such a question. And yet, when it came, the truth surfaced not through thought, but through the sensation of their heartbeat, steady, human, alive. "I am no longer the one who stands above," they said. "I am the one who stands with." Their voice did not carry power now. It carried sincerity. "I will not lead by decree. I will walk with you. I will learn with you. I will make mistakes with you. My place is not to define the path, but to share it." The scholar bowed his head, not in submission, but acknowledgement. The gathering dispersed slowly, not with finality, but with purpose. Their steps carried questions, yes, but questions that would shape identity, not unravel it. As the crowd faded into the night, the sovereign, the figure, and the advisor remained. The advisor broke the silence first. "You answered well." The sovereign exhaled softly. "I answered honestly. Whether it is well, time will tell." The figure smiled. Small, warm, unguarded. Honesty is the first step of living. They walked back toward the upper tier, the night breeze cool, carrying scents of growing things. The city lights glimmered like constellations that had chosen to stay close to the ground. Life, still learning its first language. Halfway across the bridge, the sovereign stopped, gaze lifting to the horizon. The hive was distant now, but visible, watching still, not predatory, not patient, present. The figure followed their gaze. "It will return when our time is complete." "Yes," the sovereign murmured, "but when it returns, we will not meet it as those who feared the end." They turned toward the figure fully, the quiet night holding them. "We will meet it as those who lived." The figure's hand found theirs. No desperation, no need to hold on tightly, only presence shared. Together, they walked into the unfolding dawn of a world no longer eternal, but beautifully alive. The hall of memory took shape slowly, not through command or decree, but through hands. Tentative, learning, unsteady hands. It began as a single open space carved into the heart of the capital, where columns of pale stone rose like quiet sentinels. Light filtered through translucent crystal panels set high into the ceiling, forming shifting patterns across the floor that changed with time of day. Nothing here was meant to be perfect. The sovereign had insisted on that. Imperfection was no longer flaw. It was proof of life. The people came not all at once, but in small gatherings. Some brought fragments of art created ages ago and left dormant. Others brought stories, spoken aloud for the first time in countless centuries. Some brought only silence, sitting in stillness, allowing themselves to feel the weight of memory without being crushed by it. The sovereign watched and felt something unfamiliar taking root. Not pride, not triumph, not loss. Something gentler. Presence. Yet beneath the warmth of renewal, another current stirred. Subtle, quiet, but growing. It came not from the streets, nor from the gardens, nor even from the amphitheatres where minds worked to understand their new world. It came from the horizon, from the silence beyond the sky. The hive had retreated, but not far. It lingered at the edge of the system like a constellation that refused to fade. It did not approach. It did not withdraw. It simply remained. Its stillness was not threat, but neither was it peace. It waited, and waiting itself carried weight. The sovereign felt it each morning as the sun rose. The faint hum of something vast, ancient, and inescapably tied to the arc of their existence. It was not unfinished business. It was not danger. It was simply the reminder of the truth they had embraced. All things move toward ending. The figure sensed it too. They often stood with the sovereign on the great balcony overlooking the city, their shoulders nearly touching, their silence shared and unburdened. The figure watched the horizon with a calm expression, though their eyes carried understanding deeper than words. "It watches because we have changed," the figure said softly one evening, when the sky burned in violet and gold. "It waits to see what we will make of the time we have been given." The sovereign nodded. "Then our purpose is not to fear it, but to live fully until it returns." The figure's smile was faint, warm. "Yes, and when it comes, we will meet it as those who have lived, not as those who stalled their own becoming." The sovereign breathed deeply, a breath that felt like an act of existence rather than habit. Time moved differently now. Days had shape, texture, weight. Seasons began to shift. Air growing cooler in places long held in static warmth. Rain falling where once only engineered mists had formed. The people learned to track time by change rather than its absence. But with change came consequence. A council of former admirals and tacticians approached the sovereign one afternoon, their expressions troubled. They had once commanded fleets of starships that never knew decay, never aged, never wore down. Now those ships had begun to shift. Slowly at first, then more noticeably. The vessels were living constructs, grown from alloys interwoven with immortal resonance. Without that resonance, they were beginning to age. The lead admiral bowed her head. "Our fleets will not survive centuries, perhaps not even decades." The sovereign responded quietly. "They were not built for eternity. They were built for war." The admiral met their eyes. "War may still come. The galaxy beyond has not changed simply because we have. There are empires that still hunger, factions that still rise and fall. We are no longer protected by immortality. If others learn that, we will be vulnerable." The sovereign did not deny the truth. Vulnerability was the cost of life. "We must learn to defend without conquering," they said, "to protect without dominating, to fight only when necessary, and not to preserve eternity, but to preserve life." The admiral considered this. Slowly, she nodded. "Then we must teach our people not how to fight as we once did, but how to defend themselves as living beings." A plan began to take shape, not the forging of armies, but the cultivation of guardians, protectors who carried purpose, not rooted in domination, but in stewardship. And it was then, at the very moment rebuilding began to take form, that something unexpected occurred. A signal, not from the Hive, not from within the capital, from beyond their system. It was faint, fractured by distance and the weakening of their once perfect communication networks. But it was clear enough to decipher. A voice, human, but not one of their own. A voice that filled the conclave chamber with quiet shock. "To any who can hear this, we send word from the outer spiral. Our worlds are falling. The Hive approaches. We do not understand it. We request aid, any aid, before we are consumed." Silence followed, heavy, absolute. The sovereign closed their eyes with the weight of it. The Hive had not vanished. It had moved onward, toward others who had not yet faced their ending. The figure spoke quietly. "This is not our Hive. This is not our cycle. This is theirs. The advisor's voice was hushed but steady. They ask for help. We cannot ignore them. The admiral turned to the sovereign. We can send a fleet. We can intervene. The sovereign did not answer immediately, because the truth was clear. To intervene meant shaping another civilization's cycle. To intervene meant preventing an ending not yet chosen. To intervene meant risking, repeating the same mistake that began their own fall into eternity. And yet, to do nothing meant watching others face the Hive alone, as their own people had once done, without understanding. The sovereign opened their eyes. "We go," they said, but their voice held a new gravity. "We do not go to save them from death. We go to teach them how to choose life." The figure placed a hand over the sovereign's, grounding, steady, united. The Hive remained on the horizon of the sky, silent, watching, knowing. The sovereign looked out toward the stars, toward the distant plea for help. A new journey awaited, not for conquest, not for empire, not for eternity, for understanding, for meaning, for sharing what it means to live toward an ending rather than away from it. The sovereign exhaled, prepared the ships, and the stars once again beckoned. Preparations for departure unfolded like the stirring of an old memory long asleep. Though the people no longer possessed immortality, traces of the Empire's discipline, its clarity, its precision, remained within them. But this time, it was not driven by inevitability or fear of decay. It moved instead like breath through living lungs, steady, intentional, aware. The fleets that once shimmered with eternal resonance were changed now. Their hulls, once flawless, bore subtle marks of time and wear. Panels that once repaired themselves required hands to restore them. Engines that had once sung with infinite fuel reserves now hummed with fine power. And yet, these vessels felt more alive now than they ever had. The sovereign stood in the high hangar as workers moved among the ships. Some carried tools. Some simply touched the hulls, touching something that had always existed but never been known. The sovereign rested their hand against one ship's surface. It no longer thrummed with eternal power. It was warm, faintly vibrating. Living matter, yes, but matter that would one day wear down. The figure approached at their side. "We leave soon." "Yes," the sovereign replied, their fingers sliding along the textured hull. "But we go differently now." The figure studied them. "You fear influencing them as you once influenced us." The sovereign did not deny it. "I led our people into eternity once, believing it was salvation. I will not impose meaning on another civilization. I will only offer understanding." The figure gave a faint smile. "Then we go not as saviors, we go as witnesses." The sovereign breathed softly. "Yes, and if they ask to be saved, then we show them how to choose," the figure said, "not what to choose." Before they could speak further, the advisor approached, accompanied by the admiral. Both bowed, not to show hierarchy, but acknowledgement of shared purpose. "The fleets are ready," the admiral said. "We will send 3 ships, no more. Enough to speak, not enough to conquer." The sovereign nodded. "And those who go must understand that we do not carry answers, only experience." The advisor's expression held a quiet seriousness. "There are some among the volunteers who still struggle with the transition from eternity. I would ask if they are ready." "They will learn readiness through action," the figure replied, gentle but firm. The admiral exhaled. "Then we depart at dawn." But dawn did not come immediately. The night before departure moved through the city like a slow tide, heavy with anticipation. The sovereign walked alone for a time, though not to escape the figure or the advisor. They simply needed to feel the city, its breath, its heartbeat. The streets were quiet, but not empty. Lanterns of living luminescence floated near walkways, casting soft halos of blue and gold. In the gardens, people sat together in silence, not in fear of mourning, but in recognition that something significant had begun. The sovereign paused to watch a parent and child, though age held little meaning now, sitting beneath a tree whose branches had begun to shed pale leaves. The child looked up, curiosity bright and unmasked. "Will you come back?" The sovereign smiled softly. "Yes, I will return." The child nodded, satisfied with the truth of the tone rather than the words. "Then I will wait." Their innocence struck something deep within the sovereign, a grief for what had once been lost, and a hope for what might be now possible. When dawn came, it did not blaze. It unfurled softly across the horizon, each ray of sunlight distinct rather than overwhelming. The departure field filled with those who had chosen to go. Not warriors, not commanders, people of varied purpose, some curious, some afraid, some determined, some simply seeking meaning. The figure joined the sovereign at the foot of the boarding ramp. "Are you ready?" The sovereign considered the question. "I do not know, but I am willing." "That is enough." The advisor stood with them one final time. "While you are gone, we will continue building the Hall of Memory, and the gardens, and the schools. The world will change while you are away." The sovereign placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good, let it. I trust you." The admiral lifted her hand in a firm, quiet salute. Not military, respect. The sovereign, the figure, and the chosen travelers boarded the ship. The vessel lifted smoothly, though with a slight tremor, a reminder that nothing remained eternal. The city grew smaller beneath them, then the world itself, then the sun. Stars spread like scattered seeds across a vast dark field. When they passed beyond their system's edge, the hive became visible once more. It hovered like a silent constellation, shifting shape without motion, acknowledging them without command. Not barrier, not escort, a witness to the next step. The sovereign reached outward, not physically, but inwardly, where understanding once connected them to the hive on the ruined world. They did not seek control. They did not seek guidance, only acknowledgement. And the hive answered, not with dominance, but with quiet recognition. Go, learn, return. When your cycle continues, I will be here. The sovereign felt the message settle through their heartbeat. The figure placed their hand over the sovereign's, not to anchor, to accompany. The fleet turned toward distant stars. The journey to the outer spiral required time, not the instantaneous leaps once trivial to immortals, but real time, felt through the hum of engines and the quiet hours between. During the voyage, the sovereign sat among the crew, not above them. They listened to stories of who people remembered themselves to be, before eternity had dulled the edges of identity. Some spoke of lost loves, some of forgotten passions, some of grief that had been frozen for so long it had become silent. Now the silence was melting. One night, though night was only an approximation aboard the ship, the figure spoke softly beside the sovereign. Do you think they will accept what we offer? The sovereign gazed out at the starfield, endless, shifting, alive. They may not. They may cling to their way. They may fight the hive. They may destroy themselves, or they may choose life. And if they beg us to preserve them as we once preserved ourselves, the figure asked, The sovereign closed their eyes. "Then we will refuse," they said, gently, but without exception. The figure nodded, "because love does not cage." "No," the sovereign whispered, "it frees." The stars drifted by like pages turning in a story older than memory. As they neared the outer spiral, signals grew stronger. Panicked transmissions, pleas, warnings. Voices layered over one another, full of desperation and fear. The Hive had reached them, but not as enemy or monster, as the inevitable conclusion of a cycle that had not yet been understood. Their ships emerged from warp into a system darkened by shadow. Planets partially consumed but not destroyed. Cities intact but silent. Fields of ships scattered like shells on a shore. Then a response signal. A single voice, weary, raw, human. "If you heard us, please, tell us what we must do." The sovereign stood, heart steady, and answered, "We will not tell you what to do. We will show you how to choose." The Hive shifted in the darkness beyond the farthest planet, waiting. This time, they would not face it alone. The fleet drifted into the outer spiral like a soft breath entering a room where grief had long since settled. The stars here were dimmer, not from age, but from the shadow the Hive cast across the system. The planets hung in their orbits as they always had, but their colors were muted, as though the light that reached them had traveled through sorrow to arrive. The sovereign felt the silence before hearing a single voice. Silence not of peace, but of lives paused in fear. A civilization standing on the brink of its own understanding. The first response transmission flickered onto the ship's projection field. The face of a man appeared, exhausted, pale, eyes burning with the kind of determination that only comes when all other choices have been taken away. Behind him, the faint shapes of others moved in dimly lit chambers. They were not immortal. Their bodies bore the signs of age, of fatigue, of time lived rather than endured. "You heard us," the man said. His voice shook. "We didn't think anyone would." The sovereign did not speak immediately. They allowed the man's words to settle, to breathe. "We heard you," the sovereign answered. "And we come not to save you, nor to command you. We come to understand." The man blinked, confusion flickering with disbelief. "Understand. The Hive is consuming our worlds. Entire cities vanish in the night. We have no time left for philosophy." The figure stepped into view beside the sovereign, their tone gentle but weighted with knowledge ancient and scarred. The Hive does not destroy life because it desires to. It consumes only what is already at its ending. To resist without understanding is to accelerate that end. The man's expression hardened. "We don't want to be consumed." "No one does," the sovereign replied. "We once believed we could refuse the cycle forever. We built an empire to outrun endings. We made ourselves eternal. And in doing so, we lost everything that made existence meaningful." The man stared, and something in his eyes shifted, though only slightly. "Then what do you suggest we do?" "Tell us of your people," the sovereign said. Silence followed. Then the man exhaled, tired, but listening. "Our world," he began slowly, "was born from a covenant. Centuries ago, our ancestors survived a famine that nearly wiped us out. They swore that we would always preserve life at any cost, that nothing would be allowed to fade again. We built our cities as monuments to continuity. We passed down traditions unchanged. We kept our stories word for word, never allowing them to shift. We believed that by preserving everything, we protected life itself." The sovereign closed their eyes. The shape of the story was familiar, different in form, identical in essence. "And now," the man continued, voice raw, nothing grows. Our children repeat the words of our ancestors, but do not understand them. Our fields are overworked because we refuse to change methods our ancestors declared sacred. Our minds are full of memory, but empty of creation. We are dying, not by famine, not by war, but by stillness. The figure's gaze softened, and the hive has come because your cycle has reached its end. The man's voice broke. Then what is left for us to do? The sovereign spoke with quiet clarity. You must choose to live rather than continue. A tremor in the man's breath. How? By allowing your world to change, the figure answered. By letting go of what no longer holds meaning. By remembering differently. By releasing the belief that your past must be repeated exactly to honor it. The man's head bowed, shoulders trembling. The struggle inside him was not one of reason, but identity. To change was to become something unknown. To become something unknown was to risk loss. The sovereign understood. They had once stood in the same place. We will come to your world, the sovereign said gently. We will walk among your people, not to teach them what to choose, but to show them how choosing is done. The man lifted his gaze, and this time there was something fragile but real within it. Willingness. Come, he whispered. The transmission faded. The fleet descended. The world below wasn't ruined, not hollow, not devastated, but stagnant. Entire cities looked untouched by time. Buildings gleamed as though polished daily. Streets were immaculate. But there were no children playing, no art being made, no songs sung aloud. The air felt heavy with memory, memory without breath. The sovereign, the figure, and their companions stepped into the heart of the first city. People gathered, cautious, wary, uncertain. They stared at the newcomers as though looking into a mirror that revealed something they had long avoided. The sovereign spoke quietly, so the words would not overwhelm. We do not come to ask you to surrender your past. We come to ask you to re-enter it and walk forward from it. The people listened, not because they were compelled, but because they were tired. The figure knelt beside a garden where flowers bloomed in identical rows, each identical to the next, maintained with such precision that not a leaf broke alignment. They touched one stem gently and let it lean in a different direction, a tiny act. But the gasp that rose from the crowd was sharp. The young among them stared, some in fear, some in wonder, because they had never seen something break the pattern. The figure smiled, soft and patient. Change is not destruction, it is growth. The young one, a girl perhaps, stepped forward. Her voice trembled. If we change the pattern, do we dishonor the past? The sovereign answered her, not as leader, not as teacher, but as someone who had once been lost. No, they said. You honor the past by allowing it to become part of you, not something you must preserve unchanged outside yourself. The girl looked at the flower. Then she reached out and let another petal fall out of alignment. Her breath caught. She did not cry out. She did not collapse. The world did not end. Something inside her shifted, a beginning small as a heartbeat. The people watched, and the hive, distant, vast, silent, did not descend. It remained where it was, witnessing, because endings were no longer being forced here. Life was taking its first step toward becoming again, but not all were ready. From the edge of the crowd, a voice rose, sharp, fearful. If we let everything change, how do we know who we are? The sovereign turned. You do not know at first, they said. You discover, and the discovery is the living. The fear remained, but it did not dominate. The city did not transform overnight. The hive did not vanish. The cycle did not conclude, but a single child had broken a pattern. A single flower now grew in a direction not dictated by history. And somewhere inside the world's silent heart, a door, closed for centuries, shifted. The girl's hand resting on that single imperfect flower marked something far larger than anyone in the city could have understood in that moment. A shift, not dramatic, not explosive, but undeniable. The smallest fracture in the pattern had allowed something long silent to move again. The city did not change at once. The air did not brighten. The hive did not dissolve in the sky. Nothing grand announced itself. But the sovereign felt it, a movement like the first slow turning of a great wheel. Change had begun, and change, once begun, could not return to stillness. Over the days that followed, the sovereign and the figure walked the streets, not with purpose of instruction, but with presence. They listened more than they spoke. They watched how the people tried, sometimes in small gestures, sometimes in trembling ones, to remember how to create. A woman painted over a wall of preserved ancestral symbols, not erasing them, but adding color where once there had only been reverence. An elder sat in the marketplace and began telling stories not from the sacred scripts, but from memory, flawed, shifting, real. A child broke a line of stones arranged in perfect symmetry and rearranged them into a spiral, laughing because it simply felt right. None of these things were declarations. They were breaths, but breaths are how the living begin. Yet not all witnessed with acceptance. The resistance did not rise in violence, but in stillness, a clinging to the familiar shape of what had been. There were those who looked upon change and saw only the threat of unraveling. They whispered among themselves that transformation was betrayal. They gathered in old temples where records of ancestral vows remained untouched, and knelt not out of devotion to meaning, but out of fear of losing certainty. The sovereign understood this fear. They had once lived inside it, so they did not command. They did not argue. They did not demand belief. Instead, they invited the resistors to speak. One evening, beneath the fading amber light of the planet's slow-setting sun, the sovereign met with them in the old covenant chamber, a place built at the dawn of their civilization's survival. The walls were carved with the story of the famine the man had described. The people had once stood on the brink of extinction, and from that brink, they had sworn to preserve life at any cost. But the sovereign saw now what the cost had been. The leader of the resistors was an older woman, her shoulders rigid, her eyes bright with protective fire. She spoke without hesitation. "We survived because we held to what came before. Now you ask us to let go of what keeps us whole." The sovereign stepped closer, but not into dominance, into reach. "You did not survive because you froze your world in place," they said softly. "You survived because your ancestors made a choice, a new one. They did not repeat the past. They created a path where none existed." The woman's breath caught, but her jaw did not loosen. If we allow change now, how do we ensure we do not forget what kept us alive? "You do not forget," the sovereign said. "You remember differently. You remember so the memory breathes, so it can be carried, not worshipped." The woman looked away, and in that gesture, the sovereign saw it. Not defiance, but exhaustion. Holding stillness for generations had required more strength than any war. The sovereign placed a hand gently over her heart. "Your ancestors did not intend for you to live their decisions. They intended for you to live your own." The woman's eyes filled, though no tears fell yet. She gave the faintest nod. That was enough. The cycle had shifted further, but the hive still waited, and it was time. The sovereign and the figure stood on the high terrace of the city, where the sky opened wide and the horizon showed the vast shadow of the hive coiled just beyond atmosphere. It was smaller than when it had consumed worlds untouched by change. Less dense, less pressing. It waited now not as end, but as witness. The sovereign closed their eyes and reached inward, not to power, but to presence. The heartbeat within their chest answered, alive. The hive responded, not with speech, but with comprehension. The cycle has begun again. The figure took the sovereign's hand. Are you ready? The sovereign breathed in the scent of the city. Flowers no longer symmetrical, air no longer heavy, voices no longer muted by doctrine. They felt themselves filled with something unfamiliar and yet ancient. Gratitude. Not for victory, not for salvation, not for power, for life and life's eventual ending. Yes, they said, I am ready. They stepped forward onto the terrace's edge. The hive descended, but not with tendrils or hunger. It unfolded like a great veil of light and shadow, embracing the skyline rather than overwhelming it. The people below watched, not in terror now, not in worship, but in stillness. Some held hands, some knelt, some stood with arms open, some simply watched, eyes wide. The sovereign and the figure walked into the veil. There was no pain, no fear, no dissolution, only release. The hive did not devour, it completed. Not the people, the moment. Time did not stop, it gently turned. The sovereign felt themselves become something more and less than form. Of a memory, yes, but a living memory. A thread in the tapestry of cycles, a whisper that would echo in the hearts of the people whenever they chose to live rather than preserve. They did not vanish, they changed. The figure remained with them, not merged, not dissolved, present, always present. Below, the people felt the change sweep through them like warm rain after a long drought. They did not mourn, they did not break. They felt something settle inside their chests, the knowledge that endings are not the closure of life, but the completion of meaning. The hive withdrew then, rising once more into the stars. It did not stay, it did not guard, it trusted the cycle now. The city exhaled. The people lived, and somewhere, far beyond the boundaries of sight, two presences moved together in the vastness of the cosmic cycle, not as gods, not as rulers, not as memory frozen in time, but as part of everything that lives, changes, loves, and someday ends. And because of that, everything meant something.